Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2. Good. Welcome to the session on platform neutrality. So I kindly ask all of you sitting in the back rows to join us here, because we want to have a compact group of people, and we will be quite interactive. This session is planned to be totally chaotic. So you should be sitting somewhere next in the front row. So please join us closer from the back rows. I will start the session with presenting myself in the role of Kermit the Frog this time, of the Muppet Show. And I have friends there, Starter and Waldorf. All of you that have watched the Muppet Show might know that their role will be to do country contributions to the session. And we also have Adriana here, who is going to take the notes of the session that you can see over there. Now, the topic of platform neutrality is something that's rather new to many of us. Net neutrality, on the other side, has been discussed at the Internet Governance Forum for 10 years, since 2008, when the first workshop was there, and at EuroDiG at a couple of instances. And we have reached some sort of understanding what net neutrality is, what is not, what are some possible solutions. We have even seen some regulatory approaches to net neutrality in Europe, in US, in India, and so on. But platform neutrality is not so clear. The goal of the session today will be to brainstorm. What do we see that platform neutrality is? What do we see that platform neutrality is not? What are the examples of possible breach of platform neutrality as we see it? And what are the topics that, if we should discuss it in future, what are the topics that we want to discuss in future? Two of you can jump in at any moment. Okay, the format of the session is different from anything we had thus far. It is an unconference, which means you are setting the agenda. We don't have the agenda. We came unprepared. If you didn't come prepared for the chaotic session, go out, take a wine, and come back. You need a little bit of a boost after lunch. So you will be setting the agenda, and you will also be setting the format. We will start with this format. But if at any point any one of you thinks that we should be breaking into smaller groups to discuss particular topics, let us know. So just raise a hand and say, by the way, I think now is the moment to break into smaller groups. Okay, so we start with trying to map the examples. Now, when we started discussing platform neutrality and what we could discuss at the panel here, we said, let's try to find the examples. Can we have examples of what do we see as a possible breach of platform neutrality? So I have a couple of people here that have some examples, but I'm sure many of you do have some thinking about what could be the examples of platform or breaching the platform neutrality or the challenges. And I'll start with Arangel to share a bit of experience with Facebook. By the way, is there anyone from Facebook, Google, Microsoft? Google? But you anyhow here on our phones, but I mean, it's good that you're in. Join us here, please. Anyone else? Microsoft, Facebook? No? Amazon? No? Okay. We should be cautious when we mention you, that's why. Okay, Arangel, you had a good, particularly good example of a study when it comes to Facebook and Explore feed and how it impacts the society. Shoot. This one doesn't work? Let's try this one. Huh? Tuck, tuck, tuck. No. We need these roaming mics.
I think, yep, this one works.
Works? Which one? That one, okay. We'll try with the others. I'll be juggling this. Good.
Yeah,
maybe you can stand up so I can see you.
Okay, I'll try to make it short because it's kind of a long story. But Facebook conducted an experiment in 6 countries. The experiment was announced. It was conducted, let me see if I recall well, in Guatemala, Bolivia, in Slovakia, Serbia when it comes to Europe, and in Sri Lanka and Guatemala. So the idea was, everybody of you who are using Facebook, I hope there is someone who does not. Anyhow, you're aware about newsfeed, and newsfeed contains interactions among friends, and then it contains posts from the pages you are interested in. And so what they did, they separated newsfeed And they created a new feed called Explore feed, where all posts from the pages you're interested in were removed to. So all of us, people weren't aware of that, so it took some time to people to become aware that they are not receiving posts from the pages they were interested in. By that time, Facebook offered an option to all of the pages to boost their posts so they could be seen in both feeds. So basically, this is something that is usually described as artificial scarcity, something that was kind of available. At first, Facebook found a way to somehow make it more scarce and then to try to somehow earn some extra money on the basis of that. So there have been a lot of interpretations why Facebook did that, but that's also a worrisome thing because there is no any kind of accountability there. But given the extent of Facebook, some kind of accountability has to be in place because it is a public sphere, and actually there is a great public interest in keeping it somehow as good as possible. And yeah, in a nutshell, this was the move, and the example was interesting, and I presented it at EuroDiG event because it resembles net neutrality in some ways. Because when it comes to net neutrality, usually users are those who are charged for full access to the internet, but once you decide to charge content providers, which in case of Facebook, that were pages, then once you can get some money from content providers, then you have more space to make something less available that was previously more available. So in a nutshell, that would be it. If you have any questions, I can expand.
Now, the point of this is actually the effect of the change in Facebook, which controls the platform, obviously, on the communities and possibly on independent media, on NGOs and their visibility and ultimately their business model, right? So your main, if I can say, challenge with the decision of the Facebook was what? What, not consulting the others or introducing the change at all? What would you say to Facebook why they let's say, breached the platform neutrality?
Well, I can just maybe repeat shortly here how other actors in society reacted to this change. Many independent journalists, some independent content providers were complaining. They were saying, okay, now visibility of our pages dropped massively, whereas visibility of already big players in the field stayed the same or even increased. So the one remark was inequality that created. At that time, there were elections, for example, in Serbia and in some other countries that also affected the election process because many voices couldn't be heard because of that. So in a nutshell, these kind of remarks, but I think I can encapsulate all of this in terms of inequality. So this was like...
We'll come back to that. Our Muppet Show friends, you can sit, yeah. Our Muppet Show friends are going to join. Dusan? Yeah, okay.
Of course, they said to me that I invented the devil, so I'm devil advocacy here. So in this case, sorry guys, but Facebook is private company. They can change everything. So what? What's the problem? If you don't like it, change it, switch it to something else.
To MySpace, so you want to react or keep it for later, whatever, huh? Okay, we're just teasing the questions. We'll get back to the questions. Giacomo, you had some good examples of platform neutrality or non-neutrality. Do you want to share with us?
The first example is the same. There were a lot of media, traditional media, that they prepared their own application on Facebook to make interaction between their programs or between their news or between all the ecosphere that they produced with the Facebook. And the day that the algorithm has changed, all this work was for garbage and there was no interaction until they completely renew the application, making adapted to the new algorithm. So this was, yes, it's a private company, but the day that it's asking people to link to you, then you need to commit to a minimum standard level of fairness. If not, and this is something that we are considering as a broadcasting community, we have to think eventually not to anymore link to that particular company. That could be something that could happen in the future if this kind of things continue to happen. And if you want other examples, when you look on YouTube for any kind of contents, you will go first on Google, on any kind of video contents. Of course, you get first YouTube. That not necessarily is the original source of the contents. So even if the content has been produced by BBC or by any others, you go on YouTube. I think that we are beyond the limit of fairness in treatment of all content provider in the world. Again, it's a private company, but they have the right to do anything.
I wanted to check with our friend from Google. Do you want to comment on anything of this? Come closer here, please, if you don't mind. Giacomo, I'll take the mic. Thanks. Ah, he's there. Okay, good. He's fast. So, is it okay that when you search for videos on Google that you actually get YouTube only, or do you?
It is
first list, yeah.
It is not always my own personal experience. As a matter of fact, I receive very often recommendation from Dailymotion, as I'm French. So I would not agree with this experience. I think it can happen from time to time, but most of all, it's the relevance to the users, and it's that we try to put first. So you will see the video that is the most relevant to you, whatever the source is. So we do not put forward and first our own product or services. That goes against our own principles.
Can you explain the principles a little bit? Because I think that's actually what we are talking about. What are the, well, let's say, in-house principles when it comes to sort of a neutrality of the content that you show?
So that we really have two core principles in everything that we're doing. The first one is to put the user first. What would benefit the user foremost? That's one of the main driving force behind every decision that we're taking. And the second one is the inclusivity of internet. We really want an internet that is for all and everyone.
Thanks. Want to add something at the moment or no? Okay.
I can add.
Dusan?
Of course I can add. So, as I said, this is private company. Where is the fairness in private companies? Well, I am also working for one evil private company which is producing some platform for domain names. It's something different. So when we change something, should we ask all our users, do they agree? Or we think that it will help users? This is the case of fairness. Secondly, I will quote my favorite part of hearings about Mark Zuckerberg in Senate, in American Senate. I will quote Senator Kennedy, who said from this hearing there is two ways. One way is to go for Mark, to go home and raise the money for lobbying the Senate. Second way is to form a commission with US Senate, which will somehow change the rules in Facebook. So I don't see their users, I see government, and I see private company.
Yep, Mike.
I was just going to say that, I mean, especially when considering optimizing user experience, I mean, algorithms these days are more valuable than gold. So, if it's protected intellectual property, why should we have to open up these algorithms to public scrutiny? Why is that? You don't go to the Ford Motor Company and ask them to see their design patents necessarily, or to their protected intellectual property. Why does that not extend to ourselves?
Now, you raised, or actually Giacomo raised a good question on algorithms. And when we started discussing, it was, are we talking about content policy or not? And are we treating the intermediaries, or are they intermediaries like Google and Facebook, are they messing up with the content or not? And ultimately we'll say, no, they're intermediaries, but then there is an algorithm, sure, there is an algorithm behind it, and someone is actually making that algorithm. So are we now talking actually about algorithm neutrality, or does it boil down to the algorithm only, or there is something more than that? Please introduce yourself, and before that, I apologize to the captioning guys. So Michael Ogia, you captured his name rightly, and the other guy that is a chief contrarian is Dusan Stojicevic. Okay, and then the rest of you, please introduce yourselves.
Well, may I talk about neutrality in general, not about algorithm yet. So my name is Alexander Isavnin. I'm from Russian Federation, representing Roscom Svoboda. I'm really sad that you, discussing platform neutrality, does not quote the most powerful European leader, Mr. Putin. Once he said, who will own platforms will own the internet. It's fresh enough saying, so you might not be known. But actually, discussing this, we could bring example of what is not platform neutrality, but what not is. For example, but actually this will be kind of neutrality. The Telegram case. The messenger built by Russian programmers and considered as terrorists messenger in Russia. But they're keeping running for its users. Even it's blocked in Russia, even they're trying to hide it. It still fights, it moves out, it works for any Russian. Even the Russian government says it should be banned. So this messenger is neutral, it keeps running for its users. But I promised negative examples, the Google and the Amazon. When the Russian government says, okay, this is banned in Russia, and if you Google, Amazon, whatever else, big hostings, OVH, Hetzner, would not expel it from your services, from renting virtual machines, from whatever else, we will block your addresses. And for sure, what all they're doing? They're trying to negotiate, they're trying to change their service level agreements. Before Telegram, there was Zella Messenger, which is used by Russian truck drivers for coordinating protests. It also was declared as a terrorist messenger and was blocked, and Amazon Web Services have kicked it out. Actually, the salesperson of Amazon Web Services are scary of talking about this case. They want to sell your services, but they're not ready to answer it. So, you can talk about neutrality. It would be fine if it would be talked just inside Serbia, or just inside Georgia, or just, well, inside any European countries, but one country. You can talk about platform neutrality if you still have state borders, because somebody does not like, well, photos of women without burqas. So what Google or Facebook, well, or other hosting providers will do? Nothing. We still have state borders. Each state has its own opinion on what is allowed for its citizens or what is not. But platforms we are talking about, they do not have national borders.
But if I understand you correctly, what you want to say is that actually, even though the platforms do not have national borders, the governments can impact the way they provide services.
Yes, and especially I want to point out that the Google? Yes, that the Google, in some cases, respects these national borders more than being neutral.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have the old example of while Google was still in China, the difference in Google searching of Tiananmen and other cases. So that might be one case, which is old, of course, of bending to some extent to the government impact, right? Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. But one thing before I pass the floor is interesting that we are here delineating between the net neutrality where the telecom providers are deciding to do something, and actually, as you said, the effect that then the platform providers, because of some sort of a political or other pressure, actually change the way they work, right? You want to comment something, or should I pass the floor?
No, I have a comment on his. So private companies are registered in one country. So we see that Google and Facebook are going to US Senate to say whatever they need to say there. then they are going to European Union with their branch offices open and theirs. This
He's
is
not
about
nodding in a nice way.
jurisdiction.
Okay, so we also have the question of sort of jurisdiction.
If there is no branch office in your country, sorry, guys.
Okay, good. Yes,
I think I just this.
should be working, right? Make that one work as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to whatever was said here. First of all, I don't know why we are so afraid of talking about private companies. It seems like a private company is this voodoo word that we can't actually object. But once private companies start having so much power that it actually affects society and how society is structured, then I think it is our responsibility to talk about these issues at least, right? To start discussing what we should do. And you said something about user experience. I have also worked at Google Search actually, and I don't remember anyone caring about anything other than click rate, right? So I think there was someone who said that like all these companies have been optimizing for click rate, and we've seen the bad results of this, right? Like elections and Trump being elected. I'm not supposed to say political things, but I'm not my president. But basically, we have these bad results. Like we're not even speculating at this point. We know that this has caused so many issues in our society. So I think being so afraid of talking about private companies and not putting responsibilities on them is a wrong way to go about this.
Now, two questions. I don't know, Adriana, if you want to jump in on this one. But two questions. One is, as you mentioned, it's all about click rates, right? But that's business. It's a business model. It's a business that we expect that they're oriented on business. We don't expect them to be working for a society. Okay, they have to respect some rules, right?
Yeah, we obviously they do operate as a business, but I mean, let's talk about, I think internet is so new that we sort of like, we are still afraid of talking about these issues, but let's take internet out of this question, for example, and if there's one company who has monopoly over milk, and people, in their private company, but they have monopoly over milk. So people need milk, but the company is acting against interests of society. So we will intervene, right? There are monopoly laws about everything else in a society, so why not internet? And why are we so afraid of internet, right? Like, if we want to talk about free speech, like free speech is, even outside of internet, like 30 years ago, we had free speech, but free speech doesn't mean that you can offend someone, right? So we have regulations about pretty much everything other than internet, so why are we so afraid about this, right? So I'm not saying that they should care about users, but first of all, do users know that they don't care about users? I mean, they do care, but I mean, they care very much about click rate. And secondly, if it reaches the point where it's actually bad for society, we should intervene.
Thanks. You raised two important things. One is, or two, terms. Monopoly. So, do we think about monopoly? Are we focused only about monopoly? And there was another one and I forgot because Bernard came to me, but I'll get back to that. Before Adriana, we have, Adriana, maybe a quick comment, and then we have the remote participant. Try this one.
Yeah, thanks. Well, in the essence, we are coming back here to the question why we want to regulate it, something like it is regulated, you know. It is the question of regulation of social media. Where are the social media? Why we are talking about the regulation of social media? I mean, they practically have the role of vehicle for exploring the free expression nowadays, and that's quite evident. But we are always mentioning the big companies as the bad guys. Why we are mentioning the big companies? Why we are not discussing about some small platform that has maybe content moderation or even worse things? Because you can go from that small platform to another, and it is easy to switch from another to another resource. But on Facebook and Google and other big companies, it is not easy to find the relevant substitute. But if we want to discuss and bring in the companies that started their platforms as a viable business model, then we have to ask the question, where is the limit about the public interest, free speech, and commercial business model? where you can say that this is the limit. That Facebook can say, sorry, this is my business model. I do this for purely commercial reasons, and I have a right to design it as is I may fit. I'm just provoking with a question. I know that this is a bad guy role. I'm pretty aware.
No, but it's an important question. So
Yeah,
we're talking about public interest and commercial interest. And of course, the first for the companies is commercial interest, and it's fine. But where is that limit? Where is the threshold of the public interest where we have to say, stop it now? Right?
Yeah, but the essence of every regulation is to ask why. Where is the basis for that?
Why to do that? Good.
What's your ratio to do that? Why, I mean, the interest of the company is to earn the profit and to create some new value, whether the social network or food or whatever. Why? You know, that's the question we should answer, why we should think that these social networks should have the different treatment and regime.
Okay, good.
And where would be.
We need more examples, and I know that we have a remote participant with an example, and Olivier is here with us, so I'll give him the floor as well with some examples. Remote participant, can we hear him, her? We can read you, but we can't hear you yet.
Okay.
Good, we hear you.
Hello, my name is Gonzalo López Barajas. I work for Telefónica, so I'm from the business stakeholder group, and I'm based in Madrid, in Spain. I wanted to share with you an example. It was a case on zero rating, where basically in Holland there was a telecommunication provider giving for a limited time, for about 3 months, a zero rating for an HBO, for a video content provider. So actually it was a promotion where customers were getting 3 months free zero rating for the HBO app. And the regulator said that it was prohibited because it was against net neutrality, as it was favoring a company to the detriment of others, and because also it was influencing customers' decision to get that service. And that was prohibited. At the same time, if you went to an app store, that same HBO could pay an advertisement of his app, so that his app would be listed on the top of the searches. And in fact, that was having the same effect, as basically customers would be first getting that application, and so they would be somehow prompted into getting that service, but that was not prohibited. So we had the same effect on both sides, on the platform and on the telecommunication providers, but one was prohibited because of net neutrality regulation and the other was allowed.
Thank you. I think it was an interesting parallel of the net neutrality and well, platform neutrality, or the effects of the two. So I guess this opens also as an example of the applications or apps for the phones, to what extent the corporate sector, by providing different apps or not providing other type of apps, can also impact the society, right? Olivier, you had a couple of examples since you have been discussing platform neutrality for a while. So share some more examples with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vlada. Olivier Crépin-Leblanc from the English chapter of the Internet Society, but I'll be speaking on my own behalf. I did speak with you yesterday about a couple of examples. I've got one in my mind at the moment, and that's to do with video search on Google. Not to target Google in any way, but
Google is here. Take care.
Google is here. Yeah, that's fine. And you know, it might be that it's a technical reason, but when you do a video search on Google, you do get the majority of YouTube videos and very few
Giacomo mentioned that
Dailymotion and Vivo and all of the other video sharing sites, which is unfortunate because in a way you only then end up with a subset of the information that is actually out there. And this is one of the problems that one is faced with. The internet today is so big that you still have this, what appears to be some discrimination for content that is mostly Anglo-Saxon or in English, and finding content in other languages, and that is not necessarily on the biggest platforms, it seems to be harder than having the content on the big platform. So it's a sort of self-perpetuating thing, where if you want to have the actual, the exposure for your content, then you need to put it on the major platforms, and maybe just the major platform in some cases, and the smaller platforms are not quite as well sort of, you know, referenced for people to use. And I'm not quite sure how to redress this. I don't think that legislation is the right way, personally, but at the end of the day, it's very commercial, and you know, the consumer has the choice. There might be a case that the consumer themselves are not, so the end user, if you want, is not well enough knowledgeable about the fact that there is a diversity out there that they could be accessing by using different search engines and different services, rather than always going for the, you know, the basic middle of the road platform that is given access to.
Thanks. It's interesting that you mentioned what I took out was also not just the rights of the users, but also the impact on possibly small and emerging companies which are not going to, or content providers which are then not going to go to smaller platforms, but rather to big ones, which can impact the market as well, right? So it's also the economic aspect.
It's a case on the internet where the first mover has always had the advantage. And I don't see this as being redressed at the moment. It seems to be the first movers are going to get bigger and bigger, and the smaller companies, the more sort of edge companies, are not having the chance to be able to thrive in the same way.
Before the Muppets, anyone from the small companies dealing with content or whatever? Like someone who wants to become Google one day? No? Okay. Yeah, Dušan, then
Muppets.
Michael.
So I was thinking about what Andriana said, and I will try to put something on the table. So, who created Facebook, Google, and other Amazon and other big companies? You guys, we all, users. So you were satisfied with their service, which was free. Well, not free, but we can discuss about this price. And suddenly, when they got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and when they have 70% of net traffic right now, those three companies that I have mentioned, you're trying to regulate them. Sorry, guys. You created this mess. So what's the point? Go to another company and create a better company than Facebook, Google, or Amazon. Second thing that I want to mention, okay, guys, I said the price we can discuss, but everything is about the price. We discussed zero rating, net neutrality, which is about the money. So content providers are going to some providers and offering zero rating or something like that. It's about the money. Everything is about the money. So this is the industry. You want to regulate open market. If you don't want, go to another and make another Facebook, another
so your argument
social.
is matter of choice. You have choice, you can change your choice, and you can be satisfied.
Before Facebook, you have killed MySpace.
Ah, okay, good. I haven't, but that's fine. Michael.
But Dušan, but that's the point. So many people don't want to go to another platform. Think about, there are so many bloggers, there are so many individuals who have personal accounts, personal ways of expressing themselves all over the world, that their voices would be completely unseen, both internationally and regionally, as well as locally, if it were not for platforms that take advantage of the network effect in order to amplify those voices. This is why we are part of the free expression movement. We are part of this. And frankly, think about all the individuals now who would not have been exposed to their certain audiences had it not been for platforms like YouTube, had it not been for platforms like WordPress. The fact is that, now, before the gatekeepers were a group of individuals, generally men, that were sitting in a boardroom deciding who's going to be the next big thing. Now, if I'm good enough, I can be the next big thing, because now I have the ability to, if I have an internet connection, I can upload my video and people can see me. Is that not democracy?
Okay, we have one comment there, and then we're going to back there. I'll try with this one. Just introduce yourself.
Hi, it's Raida Frias from the IGF Spain. I was going to say just about the same thing. Platforms are two-sided markets which have very strong network effects, so it's not that easy to move from Facebook to a different provider. Right before, there is no one in the other provider. So that's an issue to take into account.
Thanks. I don't know if this one should work. I think so. Try it. No?
Yes.
No, it doesn't work. They're always giving me the mics that does not work. Why are you so lazy? Get up. Thanks. I'll throw this one away.
Yes, hi. Well, I have kind of an issue with this concept of users who should stood up and fight the fight, because I think back in the days there was this concept of information asymmetry, which is nothing new, which basically tells you that if you are in a position of power, you have a certain power in that transaction compared to the rest of the people who are not privy of that knowledge. Like this was true in the old days for, and I think today's too, for the insurance companies. You know, what they know about you, it's a lot more, and that's why the premiums can go in different ways. So this is all I want to say, is that users are in this situation powerless, because this group of individuals, they know a lot more about us, and if this weren't to be an issue per se, this sort of imbalance create and will create, has already created, a market failure and create all sorts of bad epiphenomenon like monopolies of knowledge. I mean, so this is something that we have to deal with, and some of us are not empowered enough because we don't have that knowledge that somebody else in a position of power possess.
Good. We'll pass the floor to Giacomo, and then two of you can comment, of course, if you wish, Giacomo. The others, just raise a hand, and we'll try to see you somewhere.
I want to correct something that was said by Michael before. Usually we agree, but on the example he made, I don't agree totally. Because the example of if you change the rules for your app without informing your providers, because we are providers, is not like asking for the patent. It's like if you change the attack for the wheel of the car without informing the providers that sell you the wheels. This is unfair, and according to free market rules, this cannot be done. So just to put the things in the right perspective. By the way, I have to say the devil has two good advocates today, probably too much. But, and then coming back to the question of natural growth until you become a monopoly. This has happened in history many times. Rockefeller was the biggest iron producer. At a certain point, still producer in the US, and at a certain point, he was too big that was obliged to break up the company because it was suffocating the market. This happens. There was on the New York Times some months ago a question very articulated that I have seen until 500 comments on it's time to break up Google. It's a legitimate question that in any democracy, modern democracy, you have to raise. There is nothing new and nothing scary. What is scaring is that, for instance, if you look for an alternative of social media and you look for the first 8 social media in the world, you find that 4 of them belong to the same company. So there is a failure in the antitrust regulation there because it's impossible that number 1 by number 3, number 4, number 5. Then where is the alternative in the market? There is something that, according to the market rules, it is failing. And it's happening because now we are living in a global market. So before, the rules were conceived for for national market, the case of Rockefeller, for European market, the case of defining to Microsoft made by the European Union some years ago. And now we have to look for global rules for antitrust, because this comes to be a problem for everybody. Stop there with my head of the company. I take my personal head. I visited a very nice exhibition in Paris some years ago about Andy Warhol. There was a very comprehensive Andy Warhol exhibition with many materials, etc., organized by the Museum of Modern Art of Paris. Then I saw that there was an app that allows you to access online to material and the catalog of the exhibition. I said, wonderful. Then I tried to upload this and on my Android, on my mobile phone, and he said, yes, you can access to this app for free, of course, but you have to give us access to your contact list. So, is for free or is not for free? Because if you ask me to give out all my contact details, it's not for free. My contact details value a lot more than the catalog. So I buy the book, and then I wrote to the Museum of Paris asking why they accept to do so, because this is not for free. Then explain to the people that was not for free, that you have to give up something of your rights in order to get this.
You raised three things that I see. One is we are back to the issue of monopoly. So how do we regulate the monopoly, or should we focus on monopoly? Is it about monopolies of big players? The second one is actually what the lady before mentioned, but I forgot, is transparency. So would it be enough if we know what they're doing and we can easily get back to your solution, I'll choose something different, but I need to know for that, right? And the third one was actually this sort of a link to privacy in this particular case, or how do we pay, and what are our choices for paying the service, and again, how transparent is that, right? Adriana, you wanted to say something, but we have a gentleman in the background, then the Muppets, you can jump in. Yes.
Yeah, hi, I'm Luis Castro. I'm a board member of the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee. Maybe some of you know that in Brazil we have a law called the Internet Framework, Civil Framework, that states neutrality in network for everything. And there is a huge complaint from the telecom companies that says we work under concession agreements and pay a lot of money to the government and have many and several obligations are subject to very strong regulation. And we have to compete with OTT companies that are free to do whatever they want. They don't need to accomplish all our obligations. Is one point that neutrality might disturb competition in this world. And about the comment that our colleague said from a colonial country, sometime in the history, we see that nations create very disruptive technology. And if we look to the past, many of these nations were unable to create imperial, colonial empires because of this. And I pose you a question. The fact that Google, Facebook, Amazon created something very good, very disruptive, allowed them to become the new empires of the world? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, because they make great products that everyone wants to use. This is why, and by the disruptive tech in this case, it's disruptive because it empowers people. And so, you know, the more regulation that comes up, the more that innovation is stifled. And that's how I would...
Okay, we have a couple, okay, Adriana wants to jump in quickly, and then we are there in the back row.
I would just like to refer...
No, it should work, I think. Right.
Is working? Yeah. Just to refer to the question before mentioned, because it seems to me that all we are talking here is the problem of monopoly of the big companies. And here we keep forgetting one big, very important thing. The monopoly is not a problem. Sorry to say that. Monopoly is not punished. The problem is when you abuse your monopoly position. And that's something that companies cannot do. That's something that should be controlled. If we would per se, you know, judge monopoly as the bad thing, that would Just stop the innovation, stop the creation, stop the growth, and the chase for creating a new value and the profit by the company, which is the very nature of the company. So what we should do from the market point of perspective, ensuring fair competition, is to keep an eye on the practices that monopoly companies are doing and whether these practices are abusing, whether through these practices they are abusing their dominant position. But I think that's completely the other aspect of this story, and that's the market aspect of the giant companies, you know, and how they're behaving in commercial practices. The more important question here is whether we are imposing on the platforms a new role. That's the role of the public watchdog. That's the role of somebody who should preserve the open internet. That's the role of somebody who should serve proper, accurate, verified information. That's the question, because it seems to me that with all the question about regulation, we are pushing platforms from the area of intermediaries, which are not liable for the content, nor able to regulate that content, in the area where we expect that they have some role in moderation.
I'll sum up immediately after you a couple of, well, points or a couple of angles that we have been looking this discussion thus far.
Sure. Hi, my name is Christina Lausson. I work for the European Telecommunication Network Operators at NO. Just about your point on transparency and whether this can help, I think that it's not the only solution to the problem, because if you don't have other choices to make, then even if it's transparent and platforms publish the types of choices they make, what choice do you have as a user? And when we look at, for example, the proposed business to platform regulation by the European Commission, this is one of the proposals they make. So from our view, it's not the only answer, but rather you also have to use other tools such as competition law. But here, of course, transparency can help with more information for the competition authorities to review the actions of the platforms. We might also get better enforcement of competition law. So I think these two aspects work together. Thank you.
Two quick reflections on that. One is related to the choice, and I think it's quite important to mention. We usually say the choice also in net neutrality debate, but it's not just a question of choice. It's also a question. It's primarily a question of informed choice. If we expect the users to make a choice, it's not enough to have the choice. We require these people to know what they have to choose, to know the differences that are offered, to have time to understand it, to make a quality choice. So we are talking about more than just a choice. It needs to be informed choice. The question is whether we are offering, whether transparency is enough to offer people to make a good informed choice, or we need to invest more in education and so on so they could do that. The second aspect was, as you mentioned, the regulation. We tend to discuss the regulation, but I want to bring you back a little bit to the other set of options, which is cooperation, dialogue. There is much to be done, and I'm sure we can get back to Google again later on, that most of their solutions are not, I can say, evil, right? They want to do something good, as Michael said, but the question is whether they have consulted to the extent enough with other communities how this might impact the society, such as the example that Ranjel made about Facebook. If Facebook have consulted others what the effects are on small media, NGOs and so on, maybe they wouldn't have made this choice. So it's about dialogue also.
Can I do quick?
Sure, and then I'll get to Professor in there. Yep.
Just quick devil answer to this. So first, who was reading Facebook terms of reference, terms of use? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Anytime.
Anytime. Anytime. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. 10 people in the room. And you're asking about opening, educating people, etc., etc. Can I just make one quick sentence? Click, click, next, next, finished. You all do that. I don't mean exactly you, but you all do that when you install something, when you apply to something. Click, click, next, done. You don't read anything.
We'll get back to that as well, which is a case of transparency in the sense of can we understand what's written over there, the language, the way it's done, and so on. We'll get back to that. So we have 3 comments at least for now. But before that, just quickly, so a couple of topics that we mentioned. Adriana is taking notes over there. And you can comment at any point if you wish. We mentioned whether we're talking about algorithm neutrality, in fact. We asked ourselves whether we have a right to ask for platform neutrality, because it's a corporate sector. We mentioned whether transparency is enough and what is transparency. How do we tackle the monopolies, or rather the misuse of monopolies, and basically how do we approach the global model of a regulation if we need for something like that? How do we find the balance between the commercial and public interest, or not even the balance, but rather where is the threshold where the society needs to react and say, now, stop it because it breaches some sort of a public interest. We touched upon possibly the new role of a business when it comes to this sort of a business, when it comes to public good and public policies. And then lastly, the regulation and also other aspects of cooperation. I don't know if I missed anything, but you can bring it back. Professor Benedict, then we're going round. Yep.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by saying that I have some understanding that algorithm can be a business secret. If you take Coca-Cola, that has now more than 100 years of existence, and we still don't know the formula, and it sells very well. But when we look at such beverages, then we also find normally some information what is in there, how much sugar and how much of other additives and so on. And this is very important to understand how it works. And in the similar way, I think it would be important to have some transparency how algorithms work. Okay, we can find out through research and the institutions who do that, but maybe it would be a responsibility for the companies also to give us some basic information. I would like to link this up with the issue of platform neutrality. Normally, we discuss platform neutrality in the context that all content should be moved at the same speed. But I want to address the issue of filter bubble, which I think most of you are aware of, namely of receiving personalized search results. And here it makes a difference for me to know whether they are personalized and in which way they are personalized, or if there is an alternative to have them ordered in a different way. Now, is that an issue of platform neutrality at all? And can there be platform neutrality? Because any algorithm, in a way, is not neutral. Or does a neutral algorithm exist at all? There have always to be priorities, number of clicks or whatever, which order the search results. And could there be an alternative that I can opt between personalized search results, which sometimes make sense, perfectly sense, when I'm looking for products or so, and sometimes do not make so much sense because I would like to have a more neutral, so to say, search. Certainly, we could always say, I move to another service, yeah? But in that sense, this is also a discussion of the community of a certain service provider, but it's also a principled discussion in the sense that there should be some minimum transparency how the algorithm works, and accordingly also what I have to expect when I use a certain service. Thank you.
Thank you. Two aspects over there that you mentioned. One is the choice of an algorithm, actually, and that's maybe a question also for our Google friends, or maybe rather for the technical ones, is can we come up to a platform where we can upload the algorithm that we wish? So for instance, I want to use Google index search and so on, but I want to use it through my own algorithm, or Facebook news, and I want to upload my own algorithm, how I want this news to be shown to me. Maybe that would be one option. And when it comes to the privacy, that's sometimes what we mentioned as translucency. So probably we don't need to have full transparency, but we might have at least translucency of what's happening there. Do you want to comment, or we go straight? Okay, yep, sure.
Hi, my name is Swati and I'm representing SOAS, University of London and Commonwealth Scholarships. And I want to draw the attention of the chair towards the supply issue of platform neutrality versus the demand, because I think we have been talking a lot about how the users make the platforms and how they have driven these platforms towards making a monopoly, and further substantiating with free market explanations, saying that, well, if we do not indeed let them function in a way that they do, then there would be no innovative disruptions at all. Well, first of all, I think that when you explain it from a free market perspective, I think it's conceptually wrong, because free markets do not work with monopolies in theory. And having said that, I have a question with respect to an example that I recently observed in my own country, which was of internet.org. And now herein I felt that there were two parties that were involved in this. Internet.org was basically an initiative by Facebook to bring internet to the poorer sections of the Indian villages, and to bring internet accessible to all. And now they did it in collusion with one of the telecom providers in India, which is called Reliance. And if you were not associated or were not subscribed to Reliance, you could not access internet.org. So I would like to ask the question to the chair: how do you think platform neutrality works when there are these several layers of agreements that are already done on? So you have to be a customer of Reliance in order to access internet, and that comes from the and that is to go to the poorest of the sections of the society. So how do you even make this accessible to all? And this is something that I feel that hasn't been discussed, and we need to bring in more onus towards the demand side of this debate rather than the supply side, because I believe there is no choice at all, let alone informed choice in this scenario at least. Thank you.
Thank you. The question that you passed to the chair will be passed back to all of you, so we can discuss on that. But I think what you mentioned or touched upon, the accessibility for all, and also sort of this the impact on developing countries, developing communities for access to information. I think this is also one of the good questions to raise. Yep, Michael, you jump in when you wish.
My name is Jacques Begelinger. I come from Switzerland. I work for the old industries. Industry, yes, but not for tech industry, but just the old-fashioned one. And now, a preliminary remark also to this discussion that we are conducting right now. What strikes me is that we are talking about quite a number of things, but lacks a little bit of structure. Actually, what I see is we could talk about data privacy aspects of platforms. We could talk about the competition aspects of it. We could talk about content and the information and how this might impact everybody's life. But as we are conducting right now, it's somehow broiled. Now, one aspect that lacks also in this discussion, in my terms, is the Internet of Things aspect. So a platform is not just about information, it's also about transport. So connecting and transporting information which does not actually is even not recognized. For the ones who live in a hotel right now that is steered by RFID chip, like in this particular hotel, it might well be that the elevator company that built the elevator might very well know when particular room number, a particular room key went up and down, how frequently, what time, and so on. Is this bad? But it's also a platform aspect in the sense that it enables the producer of this particular elevator to be much more performant than other producers. And this is also an aspect that we should not forget.
Thank you. And a good observation that it is really a mixed sort of discussion. One of the main questions was that we also had yesterday, are we talking about a content policy here? Because ultimately these platforms, through the build-up of the algorithms, they do impact the content policy, but they're not content policy regulators per se. So it's quite a mixed discussion. Thanks for pointing that out. Michael, you wanted to jump in something before we pass the floor further.
My response, I guess, to everything that's been said so far, to the past three speakers, is that people are absolutely addicted to convenience. And the fact is that as long as people keep asking for something simpler, for something better, what more can we do? What more can anyone do other than say, all right, well, you can have a more personalized Google search, you can have a more web search, you can have a more personalized feed, you can have a more personalized everything. But the moment that something goes wrong, let's attack the platform. Let's attack the person. You know, ultimately, everything that's on a platform is user-driven. It all comes from users. So how is that necessarily something that we can you know, address? Now, Vlada, I have to say, like, I'm getting a lot of really angry looks from everyone. So just to be very clear, I don't work for a platform. Now, one.
But
two,
you might start now, you know?
What?
You might start working for a platform now.
Actually, so while I was...
Come here, don't look there. Come here, so it's...
So, no, right. So, no, so just because people are looking at me now, I mean, basically, something that you mentioned dialogue earlier, and now I'm just trying to, forgive me, I'm just going to like step outside of this role that I'm playing at the moment. I think especially when it comes to these kinds of discussions and these kinds of debate, there is a lot of public ire, there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of kind of, you know, where do we go to talk about these issues? It's not just where do we go in terms of the space, but where do we go when there's these giant multinational corporations that you know, say that they're listening, but then, you know, they get literally millions of pieces of feedback about anything in particular. I think in my experience, and I also was sharing an anecdote from last week when a representative from Facebook was talking to a group of media and press freedom advocates. And this person was talking about how they don't curate content. And of course, we were just like, well, of course you do. Of course you curate content. How can you say that? The point is, I mean, what gets frustrating is that on the one hand, if we're engaging in dialogue, that means that we're being respectful on both sides, right? So we're all invested in that. On the one hand, it's not, you know, when a representative like this young professional back here, for instance, when she comes and speaks, or when she comes in representing Google or whatever, it's really easy to kind of gang up on that person. So that's something that we do. At the same time, it's really easy to just list off a bunch of PR points that are clearly something that's not necessarily genuine. Or if it is genuine, we don't know how to ensure that it's genuine. We don't know how to test if it's genuine. So there's a lot of there's a lot of anger on both sides, and you know, on all these different sides. And part of that is because we're not really having a dialogue. And that stems from both cases. How do we have dialogue with millions of people, but then how do we also have dialogue whenever when a business model is driven by more engagement? And so any kind of loss of engagement means less money. To me, there's a fundamental problem. So whenever we want to have these discussions, what do we do? Because then there's not really in any way sincerity you know, in the discussion. And so I think that's just something to consider going forward.
One question that you mentioned, which we'll probably ask in a few minutes, is who do we miss in this discussion? Because out of the companies, obviously we have just Google. It would be great if we would have Microsoft, Facebook, and many others, right? Think about who we are missing. And before we have here, Andrea, you wanted to jump into something or no? Okay. If you want, just let me know. One quick reflection on what you said, and I think this is an important topic, I wrote it down, which is the responsibility of us as users for a demand of something. And that brings me back to discussions on privacy and security, where there is the same problem. We want cheapest, shiniest, newest gadgets and services. We don't think about privacy and security, and then we complain. It is our responsibility to create the demand for something different, including secure, private, and in our sense, something adjusted to us, right? There, and then we're going to...
Now I'm back to devil's advocate.
Okay. Yeah. Put your hat on.
Just a quick observation that I wanted to do even before, because I've been earning responsibility from users many times, a responsibility from companies maybe a couple of times, and it's been mentioned before that we, as users, give power to these companies. We make choices, okay? We make them powerful. So it's like when you elect the politicians, you put them in power. You cannot say anything about it. We, as users, we have the right for good services. So I want to have good service, and if there is available, I want to have that. But I also have the right to transparency, especially if exchange value is my data. Because now, for instance, what happens with food, some companies were obliged to sign on the brand, different brands, where the foods come from, and in that case, at least you got a way of protecting yourself. You see the money, how much something costs, so you can understand, what you're getting for what price. In cases of platforms, sometimes it's so clear the power dynamics they want to affirm. Because the way we were talking about terms and conditions, they're not made accessible at all. The only time in which I'm quite literate. The only time I could understand it clearly at first glance, it was after all the Cambridge Analytica things came up. They pop up immediately in front. You were obliged to read it, and it was written really nice and big. So it was made easier. But at the beginning, it was written in really, even visually, it was really upsetting. So it's like a factory owner hire workers, making them sign with an X a really small written contract. It's not ethical at all. I understand there are always ways to go behind it, it happens with food as well. There are companies that produce in other countries that don't have such regulation, and wherever, there will always be. But why should stop us for complaining for what is our right? Why cannot we complain? Because of course we have to be responsible, but we have to be enabled, because we are giving something back. We are not giving something. If it's data, it's money, or something. We give something which is really precious, or they wouldn't do that. So I think we have all the right to complain, and they should have more responsibility, even if it's just to contribute to media literacy. I don't say, that there are people making money, there are businesses part of society, but as such, as responsibility. It happens with normal kind of factories and industries and companies. Should happen the same way. I love Google. Google owns me. Do everything with Google. I'm happy about it, but I'm scared sometimes of how much they can do, of their power. It's about power relationships. Why do we have to accept so passively and feed in this narrative and not trying to, by complaining, maybe coming together, we are here making a dialogue. So why cannot we even try to find other ways that just...
And I think, again, the point is in dialogue, that we don't have to necessarily go to regulation. We can go into dialogue as well, right? Do you want immediately, or should we go there and back to you, if it's directly related to this?
It is, but I'm sure it will be directly directed to the next intervention as well.
Okay.
So.
Okay, let's listen to this one and get back to you. Sure.
Yeah, I want to mention the platform that we missed, and I want to also say that we missed it for a reason. But before that, I want to answer some comments that was made. I think it was just factually inaccurate that you mentioned something like now power, I'm paraphrasing, but something like, oh, now everyone has the ability to express themselves, etc., but this is not true, right? These huge platforms have algorithms elaborate enough that they have lost the right to claim themselves as moderators. They are no longer moderator because they are structuring information so much and in a way like recreating information, right? And this is where it comes from. The platform that we missed was Twitter. And this is the reason why no one mentioned Twitter, is because they're not doing that. They're being purely moderators. So even though they're huge, like we're not talking anything about Twitter right now, right? And this is a good example. So basically there are two things, right? One, they're not moderators, they're content creators, not creators, but at least they reshape the content. And secondly, they have monopoly. And third, what I actually wanted to mention, this is like a pure left-right argument to the point where it's like, I think we both had this like many times and it's boring. But I think the idea that to say that, if I was a young entrepreneur right now and I was trying to create company and I was when I reach 700 billion market cap, then government would, give me some responsibilities. That wouldn't stop me from creating my company, right? This is the problem that everyone wants to have. So I don't agree with you that this actually stops innovation.
Good. Muppets, any quick comment?
Yes,
quick
of course. Always. So first, for her, did you sign any contract with the bank? Do you know small letters in it. So it's not only on Facebook, and its entire world is set by that, but these small words, small
get the better glasses.
Yeah,
that's the point.
So get the better glasses, or you want, let's say, in terms of service, to be in some shiny, happy, big. I don't follow this. If you want, you can read even small of this, but it's always when you apply in front, behind, in the form you have read terms and conditions, and you need to check it.
He's here purposely to be a provocateur, so don't fall on that.
Is it enough? I don't know.
No, we'll get back to that.
Okay.
Dusan, you also wanted something, right?
Okay.
Google first, and then we'll go 2 more comments over there.
Yeah, sorry.
Lady from Google, sorry, not Google.
I won't be able to answer to all the points, and that's not the point there, because I'm rather excited to hear everything you're having to say on that, but just on some high-level points that I think are very important. So first, in this whole discussion, we're talking about platforms, but there is a whole different set of platforms. We all have different business models, there are different issues, we have different solutions to address it, and I think it's important to keep that in mind when we talk about it, because not in every sentence we can put the GAFA together. We do things in a very different way. On responsibility, I think it's important to stress that we do feel we have a responsibility. It has been reminded by your CEO during the I.O. We have a deep responsibility, we understand that, and this is why we are in this dialogue. So, of course, I'm here to represent the company. I'm taking the time to come and listen, and I'm not only here to use empty PR word. I don't have my papers with me. On the contrary, I think we are one of the company where we really do try to listen, and especially on the point of the terms of condition. This is why we've been hearing this feedback for a long time, and before Cambridge Analytica, way before, we created my account. I don't know if anybody has ever used it. It's a super powerful tool where everything is written in big. It's simplified, and you can always click to learn more if you want to learn more. And we try to put the user in the driving seat. Again, you don't like personal search, you don't like targeted advertising, you can opt out of targeted advertising. We try to explain to you what we do and leave you in the driving seat to decide. So that's on a general high-level note.
And it's generally very useful that you're here, so that's a big step always for the discussion. Okay, let's take 2 more quick comments, because we have to wrap up a little bit, and I have a couple of specific questions for all of you before we wrap up. So Dusan, and then there.
Yeah, my name is Dusan Saf. I come from EuroDiG, but I speak in my personal capacity. Well, first of all, we have to be aware that these platforms are, of course, private companies, but they have significant market power, and they can also abuse it. And what is important here, we have a different sort of platforms, as we heard before, but they are becoming very strong. Not only they provide services to us, but they become aggregators of content, news applications and services, and they can abuse their market power here. Probably not intentionally, but we have to be aware that these technologies are never neutral. So algorithms are not neutral. That's why transparency is important in terms of this choice and selection. And then users don't have choice. So, I mean, we cannot complain as users, but if we want to use these services, then we have to use them. We have no other choice, because they have such a power on the market. And if a company has a power and abuse it, then there is a normal solution that it is regulated. It can be regulated either as utility, or according to antitrust laws. So it depends whether it abuses market power by its algorithms or in operations, because these platforms can also abuse market power in operations. So another thing is that, of course, there is no discussion about these issues, or there is a lack of discussion. There is not multi-stakeholder discussion. And the obvious reason is that these companies have access to the European Commission, and the European Commission, unfortunately, even entrusts some sort of self-regulation to these companies, which is also wrong, because this fake news and things like this, we cannot entrust this regulation and moderation private companies, it has to be somehow according to public laws, and we have laws in place to regulate this. And then are there alternatives? Of course, there are some alternatives. If we want to have alternatives, then we have to invest into some decentralized solutions and some ethical solutions. When we had a youth school at CIDIC, we have two groups. One was representing companies and one users. And we were very surprised because the two groups, they came to the same solution. Not exactly the same, but based on the same principles. And these solutions were based on ethical principles. And I think that this should be also the guidelines for these platforms. They should become more ethical.
Thank you, Dusan. Okay, maybe a quick comment from there, and then we kind of go towards wrapping up.
Okay, thank you.
Here's the microphone.
I have the microphone, yes. Thank you. My name is Paolo Cesarini. I'm from the European Commission, and I'm dealing with fake news, by the way. But it's not the comment I want to make, because in my previous job, I spent a lot of years in the antitrust department of the Commission. So my comment is more about this concept of handful of monopolies. We are in the hands of a handful of monopolies, which is a contradiction in terms. There is a monopoly or is not, but it cannot be a handful. And I would like to react on this suggestion that there would be a regulatory failure from antitrust authorities that would have missed the opportunity to put stricter limits on platforms on the basis of competition rules. Well, first of all, I would like to remind that since the beginning of the 2000s, the Commission in particular has not been very tender with tech giants. Started with Microsoft and going then the last year with Google with quite heavy fines, where in fact abuse of dominance have been sanctioned in both cases. But when you talk about abuse of dominance, and if you don't want to fall into the trap of the collective dominance theory, which is extremely difficult to support legally, well, you have to define, first of all, what is the relevant market. What is the market? In the case of Microsoft, was the dominance on the operating system, and the abuse was the extension of the power into the server market. In the case of Google, the dominance was found on the search engine market, and the abuse was to give prominence to the shopping services of Google to the detriment of one of the competitors. Now, when we talk about freedom of expression, freedom of business as well, to carry out business as well, I think it is important to progress a bit in this discussion. It's extremely fashionable today to say that competition rules can actually step in and regulate the problem. But what do you want to do? You want to break up these tech giants, as in the past has been attempted with Bell, and to create 7 baby Bells or baby Googles? Well, the outcome was not very efficient. The antitrust authority produced a mess by simply breaking up that way. So the most promising way is to see whether the vertical integrations that are created either by mergers or by unilateral extensions of power in neighboring markets or downstream markets, but which one the market? So I think it would be very beneficial here, and since this concept comes over and over, I mean, to start to define what is the market we are talking about, which would be dominated by a single platform. Is the data market? Are the data sets held by Google a perfect substitute with the Facebook data? Probably not. Probably yes, I don't know, but this is a study that needs to be carried out. And the abuse would consist in what? In extending the use of the data through algorithmic services into news aggregation, probably, or other form of downstream services that could, in a way, compete with publishers? Probably, but we need to be very specific, otherwise we simply repeat a mantra with not much substance in it. And by the way, final remark, the freedom of expression, Article 11 of the Charter, is an equal ranking with Article 16, which is freedom to conduct a business.
Thank you. We have a couple of more minutes. I know that there are a couple of people that wanted to add something, two ladies, Giacomo, Andrea. I wanted to first check, is it something that you really have to say? or I can pass you a different question and also to all of you. I wanted us, the idea of this session was really what we did. It was brainstorming. It was absolutely uncontrolled session wherever we go to get the sense of what are we talking about. We have a number of issues that we sort of clustered, but what I wanted to wrap up is with thinking about next year EuroDiG, or even, if you wish, the IGF, which comes this autumn, winter. It seems like we need to have further discussion. That's obvious. I guess that's one of the messages. What would be the question, one sole question, that each one of you would like to see on that session to be discussed? So we are sort of trying to draft the questions of the session. Think about one single question that's maybe top priority for you that you would like to be discussed so that we can take notes and maybe try to articulate that a little bit better. Is it okay, Giacomo? Can you do that instead of your question or your comment? Try it. So let's start with you and Andrea and then the ladies if you wish as well. Anyone who wants, but be like a tweet, really. Articulated question for discussion.
It's complicated to reduce so much, but I think that if we are discussing about monopoly, for instance, there are two things that shock me particularly. One is the fact that in social media we have 4 of the first 8 social media in the world that belong to the same company. And these 4, the 3 that has been bought by the first company are in a range of 60. It means that they bought everything that was moving and bubbling that they see in the market that as a potential competitor. So we are in a new situation about antitrust where you need to prevent that somebody could buy his next competitors, because then there will be no competition. This is what is happening in this market. The second thing is very specific. It concerns the media. Because at the end of the day, the most of the money that is made, the most profitable business of this platform are still the oldest profession of the world, that is advertising, okay? We are talking of high innovation, but the money comes from advertising. And if you ask about advertising, you ask how do you measure a click on a video material, then there is somebody that says 5 seconds is enough. Somebody says that simply passing with the mouse over the link is a click, etc., etc. There is no rule. When we broke the monopolies of the media market and broadcasters in Europe, it took years, but at the end we arrived to a consensus about what audience measure is. In the advertising market for the platform, nothing. Each platform decides, each platform owns the information, and each platform negotiates with the advertising agency. Transparency, known. Responsibility, known. Competition, known. Because on the contrary, we have to say for the media, traditional media, how many viewers, how we measure them, and we have to guarantee that this was made under an audit.
It was a longer question, but I think we sort of got the articulation. But okay, we have a remote participant. I'll pass on to you. Try to be within a tweet, please. We want to go for coffee, yes. So we have here.
Thank you. So this is the question from Gonzalo from Telefonica, who intervened earlier, and it is in a tweet format as well. So his questions is, are the platforms able to determine people's digital experiences and that of other business and competitors?
Okay, good point. Okay, Andrea. Then,
thank you.
Ladies, you still want to? Sure.
So I have a question. It's going to be very short. But I want to do an analogy for this question. It looks like, if you look in the past 10, 15 years, it looks like we have been at rave parties, enjoying the best drugs of the world. And we had fun, and we enjoyed the time, and we dance, and we make fun, and we meet people. And then suddenly, you get down, and you see what's happening. And I think the questions that we should ask is, was it worth it? What we as a society and single actually are putting at stake from the digital revolution. There was a kind of a per se, unchallenged, benevolent perspective on everything that came from Silicon Valley. It's good. We don't be evil or, empowering. But I would like to ask this question: what are we losing? What is the price of that? And the challenge is to look at all-encompassing. Looking at our society are changing, our cities are changing. What is the impact on the job market? What is the impact of the, of the rent distribution? And probably we should look at those problems beyond the single, technological innovation, but more as a societal question. And to go back to this person from the European Commission, which market are we looking at? I think if you are looking for an answer, just go to China and look what two companies, Alibaba and Tencent, led by Jack Ma and Pony Ma, they share the same last name, turn their original platforms into. They do everything, from grocery to banking, to looking for your doctors, to search engines, to texting, everything. And I think one company is going this direction, we already know it, it's Amazon. And I think that more and more, as we challenge how much advertisement can be the revenue stream of Google and Facebook, of the platforms, those platforms will have to find new ways to monetize their businesses. And probably this could be an idea. I don't think it's the best option, but if we don't ask, and this is linked to the first question before, what are we putting at stake as our society? And look at it as our democracy. Look how Twitter became the tool that the president now blessed the rest of the world with his tweets. And Twitter was designed and was presented as the one that allowed the revolution in Egypt or in Moldova to happen. So look back and see, okay, can we put that on the balance? And now where are we going? Probably this is a question that we should be asking. And I thank you I like the brainstorm. I think we should do more. And I like the challenging and I like the provocative.
The Muppets. No, thanks. It was a blog, not a tweet, but okay, we accept it.
So
thanks, it was quite useful. Yeah.
Can I say shortly?
Yeah, of course, you're a Muppet.
His message, let's go back to the party.
Yeah. And we'll have to remove the word drugs from this transcripts, but that's fine. Professor. Maybe this one.
I want to come back to your request. I recognize that there have been improvements in the information strategy of the big internet companies, and I think this is due also to the kind of constructive dialogue which has taken place. But for the tweet, what to do in the future session, I say there is still room for a lot of improvement, and therefore we need to discuss stronger accountability, starting from transparency.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to articulate a question for the next session? We have quite many notes. Okay, then before I pass the final word to the Muppets, I want to challenge you. Tomorrow is the deadline for the application of the workshops for the IGF, and I'm happy to put down a workshop on this one. Anyone wants to join? Good. Let's sit down afterwards and talk how we can put the proposal for tomorrow. And then, and as the last words, two of you, and of course afterwards we'll have the messages. Anna is there.
I guess I'm sorry, I'm not going to give a last word as a antithetical Muppet. I'll just say that, in the end, for these things to be better, we all have to make them better. And so, I mean, the fact that you're here now means that you care. And I think that the more that we can also work with those that might be perceived as being, quote unquote, the enemy or the antithesis or whatever, I think we'll get through this when we collaborate. So that's how we, collaboration is going to be what saves us.
In my style, devil style, so you let the monsters out of the cage, so you now want to put them back into the cage, so enjoy.
Okay, we have some messages at the end, as with every session.
So good afternoon. I read some messages that I wrote during the session. You tell me if you agree or disagree with them. So the debate around the internet neutrality should go beyond the internet service providers. Consider that different bias in online platforms can also lead to discriminatory treatment of their users. Platform neutrality is particularly alarming due to their worldwide reach and dominance. News feed implemented experimentally by Facebook in 6 different countries is one of the recent problematic examples of breaching neutrality. Private companies need to have a minimum standard of fairness. Some in-house principles could be implemented to reach platform neutrality, such as to put the users first as a main force drive, and inclusivity. There is a divergence whether platforms should disclose their algorithms. On the one hand, their goal is to optimize users' experience. So why should companies disclose algorithms if they are protected by intellectual properties rights and if they allow platforms to improve users' experience? On the other hand, when private companies have so much importance and affect so many actors, they should have some sort of accountability vis-a-vis our society. So responsibility of private companies has existed over a long time and could be used as a model to reflect on the limits between public interests and commercial ones. And monopoly and transparency are concepts that impact platform neutrality. 4 of the first 8 social media in the world belong to the same company. Because of that, platforms should not abuse of their monopolistic position regarding neutrality. And further, more transparency would help to enforce competition law and allow people to make informed choice. And finally, in terms of platforms' content, users are used to convenience, and because of that, most of platforms have adapted their model to user-driven content and implemented filters. So that's basically how I summarized the session. Do you agree, or do you have any comment on that?
If you wish, what we can do, since we're at the end of the session, of course, if any one of you wants to help finalizing the sessions, if you have any serious objection, just get back to us here and then we can work on that. I think that's the easiest way. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and see you at the IGF and EuroDiG. I have to switch this off.